The Tom Woods Show, episode 775.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, if you're like me, you get more email than you can cope with, and you frankly don't know what to do about it. Well, do what I do. Use SaneBox to declutter and get your life back. Check it out at SaneBox, SaneBox.com/Woods. Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. Very interesting topic today, and a very, very interesting guest, Joshua Fields Milburn, who is best known as being one half of the Minimalists. He and his friend Ryan Nicodemus have collaborated on this project for quite some time, where they've gone around and talked about the idea of minimalism, which is not just a matter of downsizing and maybe giving up some of your stuff, but really asking questions about meaning and about the purpose that the stuff is supposed to serve. Whereas a lot of times people are liable to get caught up in buying stuff for the sake of buying the stuff and not really for some larger reason, and they find this to be, in the final analysis, unfulfilling. Well, he has written a number of books on this subject. He's got a memoir called Everything That Remains. But what I want to talk about in particular is his documentary film called The Minimalists, released earlier this year, 2016. I recently watched it. I can't say I'm fully on board, but I understand where he's coming from, and I think it's very significant and important. He's been featured in Time Magazine, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Forbes, the Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Chicago Tribune, Seattle Times, Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, Vancouver Sun, Village Voice, LA Weekly, and many other outlets. Normally I don't list all those, but in this case, I wanted you to know this guy has gone from obscurity to, in his niche, semi-stardom. So a very interesting story and very interesting ideas, challenging ideas that we ought to grapple with. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Oh, this is going to be great, man. This is going to be a great conversation. I watched your documentary. I watched The Minimalists, and I watched it with the three oldest of my five girls, so 13, 11, and 10, because I thought this is going to provoke a good conversation afterward, and they're old enough to understand what's being discussed in the film. And, by the way, the people they liked the most in the film were you and your friend.
Yeah, me and Ryan, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't always the academics they liked so much, but they definitely liked you two guys. They liked how real and authentic you were, and the fact that when you would have an event that was sparsely attended, you put that in there, and you made clear that it wasn't always speaking to the gigantic audience you have now. This was a long slog to get out there and get your ideas out. Give me the 2-minute version of what The Minimalists, both the cause and the documentary, are all about.
Let's see, I'm 35 years old now, but when I was 28, I was sort of living this American dream. I had everything that I thought I ever wanted: the 6-figure salary, the big house in the suburbs with more toilets than people, and the closets full of expensive clothes, the luxury cars, all of the things that were supposed to make me happy. I was really living the American dream. But then my mom died and my marriage ended, both in the same month. And these two events really forced me to look around and start to question what had become my life's focus, basically. And I realized that I was so focused on the wrong stuff. I was so focused on so-called success and achievement, and especially on the accumulation of stuff, these sort of trinkets of success. And I realized that I had lost sight of what was important. In fact, I didn't even know what was important anymore. And it turns out I was forsaking many of the most important things in my life, instead chasing a very narrow vision or version of success. And so after those two events happened, I started down this other rabbit hole. I discovered this thing called minimalism and found this whole community of people online. And the thing that was really appealing to me is that there were all these different types of minimalists. In the film, there's a guy named Colin Wright, who's this young entrepreneur, and everything he owns fits in his backpack. He owns like 52 items, and he travels to a new country every 4 months. And in fact, he doesn't even pick the country that he's going to. He outsources that to the readers of his website, and they kind of vote where he's going to go next. And he writes about that. Yeah, it's really interesting, and admirable. But Tom, I imagine you're somewhat like me, knowing you and your show. I didn't want that same lifestyle.
That wouldn't work for me. No.
I had no desire to be the peripatetic writer who travels in perpetuity. And so then I found these other minimalists like Leo Babauta and his wife Eva, who he's also in the film, and he has 6 kids, and he's sort of this ultra minimalist and has this whole minimalist family. And I realized that there were all these different flavors of minimalism, and while all these people led considerably different lives, whether they were in the city or the suburbs, they lived in tiny homes or lived on a farm somewhere, what I realized is that all these different people were living these different lives, but they shared similar values. They were all trying to live a more meaningful life, and the way they were accomplishing that was by getting this excess out of the way that allowed them to refocus on what was important. And so for me, my journey into minimalism started with a question: how might your life be better with less? And by answering that question, I was really able to identify what the benefits of simplifying my life were, instead of just how to declutter my closet. I think we all understand, here are the 67 ways to declutter your closet. That's not as appealing to me as, why should I do this? Why is it important for me? And initially it was, it'll give me an opportunity to regain control of my finances, because in the corporate world, I made a few $100,000 a year, and I was really successful. I was the director of operations for 150 retail stores in Cincinnati, Ohio. And you know what? I realized that even though I was making good money, I was spending even better money. And as you know, that equation doesn't work. It hasn't worked in our government, and it certainly doesn't work in my individual life, because I don't have the ability to print my own money. And so now I'm in massive amount of debt, and even though people think I'm successful in my late 20s, I had all this anxiety and stress and overwhelm and insecurity associated with the life I was living. And by letting go of this lifestyle, I could start focusing on what was actually important to me.
One thing that I was really happy about in this documentary was there's a point where Ryan is talking about somebody, hypothetical person, who has a huge book collection.
Uh-huh.
And in the answer he gives, he makes clear that the message you guys have goes beyond simply don't have so much stuff, that material things are bad or anything such thing as that. It's much deeper than that, because he was envisioning a person who takes tremendous intellectual delight from his books, and even just the physical pleasure of holding the book, and each one has great meaning for him, and being deprived of that library of books would impoverish him very much. And Ryan says, well, you know what? Keep your books. Obviously, your books are very meaningful to you. And I thought, all right, good, because otherwise, I thought that was a very, very human response. It wasn't that there's one size fits all, and I say you got to clear out all those shelves because it'll give you a more meaningful life. In his case, it wouldn't.
No, and I think that's the interesting thing here. In fact, I wish there was this list of, well, Tom, here's the 100 items you should own, and then you'll be happy, because that would be much easier, and I could just give you a pamphlet, and that would be the key to happiness. But I think quite often one of the problems we have is we try to pursue happiness through other people's templates. And so we'll say, I should have this big library, or I should have this big house, or I should have this or that, or whatever it may be, this trinket, and it's supposed to make me happy. We're constantly pursuing happiness through these ephemeral pleasures that we've been told will make us happy. And I think the truth is there's nothing inherently wrong with a particular material possession or any item. Consumption isn't the problem. We all need some stuff. As I talk about in the documentary, compulsory consumption is the problem. Thinking we're supposed to buy something because it's going to make us less stressed or better or whatever, without really thinking about, does this add value to my life? And that was another question that was really important to me, is, does this add value to my life? And what I mean by that is does this thing that I'm going to consume or this thing I'm going to hold on to, is it serving a purpose or is it bringing me joy? And if not, I have to be willing to let go of it so that I can make room for what is going to serve a purpose or bring me joy. And I think that's different for each of us, Tom, that the things that add value to your life and to your family's life may not necessarily add value to mine, and vice versa. And so we have to keep asking that question, because even the things that add value to my life today at age 35 may not add value at age 40 or 45. And so it's a constant journey. You're always working toward that horizon. But of course, once you get to the horizon, there's a new horizon.
I'm happy to say that although my girls I would not describe as minimalists, nevertheless, they are far, far less obsessed with material things than I was when I was their age. When it comes to Christmas gifts or whatever, they're quite content with just basic things. And I want to shower them with gifts. I want to give them everything there is, but they honestly don't want that. I have a 13-year-old who, for her last birthday, she insisted she genuinely did not want gifts. She wanted the money that would have been spent on gifts to be donated to the animal shelter where she volunteered. And so she wound up doing a GoFundMe campaign, and she wound up raising $500 for the local animal shelter. That gave her more pleasure than all the trinkets in the world would have given her.
There's an apothegm that ends up being true. Giving is living. And I think that I was really able to understand that it's meaningful to contribute beyond myself, to contribute to a community or the charities, or there's a great website called givewell.org who ranks different charities based on their effectiveness. And what I've learned is that that's one of my core values now. And even though I was making really good money in the corporate world, I wasn't giving as much as I could have been giving because I was constantly pursuing something else for myself. And I had to let go of that idea of success, that identity that I had, so that I could figure out, well, how can I contribute to other people, and will I find that meaningful? And ultimately, yes. I mean, I feel like the more that we give, the more we grow, and then of course, the more that we grow, the more that we have to give. But you mentioned your daughters and how maybe there's a generational shift as well, and I think that right now we are shifting from a culture of ownership to a culture of access. Now, I don't mean that in the sort of socialist perspective where we're all having to share things, but we get to share in many instances, or we just get access to things where we don't have to hold the physical artifact anymore. And so I think technology is the best example of this. It used to be that I had to have 1,000 DVDs if I wanted an extensive movie collection, but now you can go online, and whether it's Netflix or Hulu or iTunes or whatever, and you have access to basically a functionally infinite amount of movie titles. And the same is true with music. And then, of course, when it comes to the supposed sharing economy, I would just call it the access economy, whether it's Uber or all of these apps on our phones that give us access to goods and services that we wouldn't otherwise be able to possess if we didn't have the money for those things.
You'd be very interested in a book by Kevin Kelly called The Inevitable, and the subtitle is something like 12 technological transformations that are going to change our lives or whatever. But the book is called The Inevitable, and he has a chapter in which he says that given exactly what you're talking about, it's possible that kind of model will spread to more and more things that we do, such that the number of things you would actually have to own physically could drop substantially. I mean, maybe you use something for a little while and then somebody else uses it, or whatever, even physical things, or even a car ride. You don't need to have your own car. There are all these possibilities that grow up, and I think people assumed that as technology developed and as civilization moved forward, there would always be more and more and more and more stuff produced that we would need to have. But this digital revolution, as you say, makes possible a command over things that is astonishing in its scope. I can have access to almost any book ever published in one way or another, and yet I don't have to have a single thing on my shelf.
Yeah, but also realizing that we don't have to go that route. It's certainly we have the free will to have an entire bookshelf full of physical books if that's what we really find value in. But also we don't have to be we no longer have to be burdened by that, and if we don't want to be. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Kevin Kelly, and I agree with what you're saying there. And also while I was on tour when we were filming the documentary, one of the stops was in Albuquerque. And this guy came up to me afterward and he said, I need a chainsaw about once every 2 years. And so whenever I need a chainsaw, I go get it from my storage locker. It just happens to be that my storage locker is Craigslist. And so I'll go on there and I'll pay $25 to get a chainsaw. And then once I'm done with it, I'll put it back in my storage locker, give it to someone else who can actually find value in it. And so what I find meaningful in that is realizing that while that process in and of itself might be a bit cumbersome to do that, eventually there will be an Uber for chainsaws, and the technology will allow us to have access to more of those things and share them if that's what we're inclined to do.
I want to say one thing we thoroughly enjoyed watching The Minimalists. We thoroughly enjoyed it, the kids and I. And I'm talking about this is something we watched on a Friday night. Friday night, kids are expecting something other than a documentary called The Minimalists. But I put it on. I said, I think this would be useful for us to watch. And they agreed that it was useful. They were glad that we watched it, and I'm going to make them listen to this episode too next time we're driving around in the car. But one thing I didn't like, I'll just be honest with you, this may just be a prejudice of mine, but I don't like Sam Harris at all.
Yeah.
And I thought he came off as the smug philosopher type. That everybody leads such meaningless lives. If only they'd listen to people like me, they'd get some meaning back in their lives. And I didn't detect any of that in anything you said or anything Ryan said. There was none of that holier-than-thou arrogance, but I felt like that came through a bit in Sam Harris.
I think we wanted to capture a bunch of different perspectives in there. So we had someone like Sam Harris, who is actually a very well-known atheist, but then we also had someone like Joshua Becker, who is a pastor and has a family out in the suburbs of Phoenix, and tried to provide these different perspectives. And it's funny you say that because quite often after we would do screenings when this thing was in theaters, we did a pretty big theatrical release this summer of the film, and people would come up afterward and they say, I absolutely loved that Sam Harris was in here. It really resonated with me. And then 2 people later would say, why did you put Sam Harris in the documentary? And it was interesting because what we tried to do is find a way to make minimalism a bit more accessible, to show people that minimalism isn't a radical lifestyle. It is a practical lifestyle. And I found the best way to do that was to share all of these other recipes, because for the last 6 years over at theminimalists.com, Ryan and I have shared our story, and it's been the Joshua and Ryan show, whether it's on our blog or the Minimalists podcast or any of our books. We've written 3 books together, and that's been great. We've been able to share our perspective and our recipe, but we wanted to go out and tweeze ingredients from other people's recipes, not in hopes to proselytize or try to convert anyone to minimalism. I don't think you can do that. I don't have the ability to baptize anyone in minimalism. Really what I want to do is share a bunch of different recipes in hopes that you can tweeze out a few ingredients and sort of create your own recipe for more intentional, simpler living. It doesn't mean that you yourself have to be a minimalist, but what I hope is that you can grab a nugget or 2 and say, this will really help me simplify my life so I can start focusing on maybe my health. For me, that was a benefit I uncovered. I used to weigh 80 pounds more than I weigh now, Tom, and I was just unhealthy. I forsook the people closest to me, so I regained control of my relationships. I wasn't really focused on what I was passionate about because I was so focused on this daily rat race, and I really wasn't focused on growth or contribution. And these were the values I uncovered, and what we wanted to do was show people these different perspectives to help them uncover what their values were as well.
All right, I want to talk to you about libertarianism too, but first let's thank our sponsor. Folks, at the end of the year, your email inbox gets crazier than ever. You got all this political stuff, you got all these promotional emails for Christmas gifts. You want to just get rid of it all and never hear from them again. Well, that's one thing SaneBox can do for you with its Sane Black Hole folder. Or you got a lot of busy friends now at the end of the year. Are you sure they're getting back to you when you write to them? And then you got to balance in your head, all right, I wrote to this one, did I write to that one, did they get back to me? Well, there's a special folder with SaneBox called Sane No Replies. And it reminds you of emails that have not been replied to. There are all kinds of tools SaneBox makes available to you. And in general, it helps sort out your important email from your not so important email and saves you time. I use it myself and swear by it. Check it out at sanebox.com. That's sanebox.com/woods and get a 2-week free trial. And if you continue on, you get an automatic 25 smackers discount for being a Tom Woods Show listener. sanebox.com/woods. All right, I said I wanted to talk about libertarianism. Before I do that, I want to ask you about the tiny house movement, which obviously can see how it would be related to minimalism, although I could imagine somebody having a more conventional house and being a minimalist. But I had a guy named Jay Schaefer on the show all the way back on episode 215. This one is 775. And I learned something about the tiny house movement. That is just definitely not for me. That would really not make me happy. And that was the part of the documentary, actually, that my girls were looking at me like, Dad, are you getting any ideas here? Because this would be a little, we have 5 kids, and and I know you had somebody with 6 kids, which again startled them. But talk about the tiny house movement for a minute.
God, I don't want to live in a tiny house at all. So I'll just put that out there right away.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
All right. I really admire the people who want to live that and move down that route. And also, I think it's a great way for people who are interested in owning their home outright. And it's a very affordable way to do that, especially if you don't have kids. So some of the people we interviewed in the documentary, there was Tammy Strobel and her husband Logan. They own a tiny house out in Northern California. But it's just the 2 of them, and it's a really tiny house, and it's really well done, and it's gorgeous. It's intentional, and I mean it has to be intentional, right? You have to. It's 188 square feet. You have to plan every square foot of that thing. But then I also had someone in the documentary named Graham Hill, and he has this really awesome 420 square foot apartment. You'll probably remember this because it sleeps 7 people, has a movie theater in it, has a dining room table that seats 12 people, has a office area, all in this 420 square feet because the whole thing's modular. And again, I really admire that, but I also don't want to live in New York City personally. And that type of house is conducive for living in New York for sure. But for me, what I realized is that using these spaces, however you are deciding to live your life, you want to have a home that you're able to fit your life into, or build a home around your life, as opposed to trying to cram a life into a house. I remember once upon a time I had 2 living rooms at one point, and one of them I didn't use at all, right? It didn't make any sense for me. Or when Ryan was going through his journey, Ryan and I have been best friends since we were 5th graders, and so he's the guy who runs the minimalists.com with me. He lived in this 2,000 square foot condo all by himself. And it had 2 living rooms, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a 2-car garage, and you realize that there's a lot of wasted space there. For me now, I live in Missoula, Montana. It's me and my partner and a 3-year-old, and so we have this family who lives in a 3-bedroom house. We have an office there, and that is a space that's appropriate for me. And so when I think about living spaces, that word appropriate tends to come up a lot. Is what is appropriate for my lifestyle at this point in my life as well? Because often people will downsize once their kids leave the house, and they they'll move into a community that's more in line with their current interests and desires. And so ultimately, the question with living intentionally, especially when it comes to home, is what's appropriate for my lifestyle. We interviewed an architect, a minimalist architect in the film. His name was Frank, and he said whenever he builds a house for someone, he doesn't ask, do you want a living room, or do you want a dining room, or do you want whatever? Because most people say yes, because we've been told this is the template we're supposed to live in. Instead, he asks, how do you live your life? And he tries to build a house around their life. And I think we can all do that in some form to get more use out of the space we actually have.
I'm actually having a house built and having it designed and everything, and it really is specifically the exact house I need. There is no existing house that's exactly what I need. I want to have an office that's soundproof. I mean, I have a lot of peculiar needs, and they're going to be met. And it won't be a tiny house, but it'll be comfortable, and it'll be the Woods house. It'll be the house that makes sense for the Woods family. Now, I want to, geez, there's so many things I want to ask you here. I want to ask you about going on the road with all this stuff. I want to ask you about libertarianism. Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. You describe yourself as a libertarian, and I run into a lot of people who say they're libertarians, or people who talk about libertarianism who think libertarianism means greed and just getting as much stuff as you possibly can, and that's what we're all about because we believe in the free market. But what we're really all about is individual choices.
Yeah, agency, really, right?
Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, whether you make a good choice or a bad choice, the choice is yours. That's the point. Our philosophy doesn't dictate to you the content of your choices, just your right to make them. So do you see a connection between that kind of political view of yours and your lifestyle as a minimalist?
I do personally, yes, because I want to have agency over my own life, but I also want to be intentional with the decisions that I make. For the longest time, I followed a template. I went down this path of supposed success, but my priorities were out of line. I like I said earlier, I forsook the people closest to me, not because I didn't love them or care about them, but because I was so busy working 80 hours a week, allocating all of my time to networking buddies and executives and people in the office next door. And it's not that those are bad people. It's just quite often they didn't share similar values to me. And that meant that by the end of the day, I didn't have enough time to spend with the people close to me. It's the reason my marriage ended. It's the reason a lot of my friendships were in shambles, because I didn't treat the people. I sort of made them a lip service priority in a way, right? I said, yes, this is my priority, or my health is my priority, or my writing is a priority. But I think our real priorities are how we spend our time each day. And I want to be able to make the best decisions with those 24 hours. We don't all have the same resources. And I think that's okay, that there's this inherent inequality in the world. I grew up really poor. I was on welfare and food stamps growing up, and there was a lot of alcoholism and drug abuse in the household. And what I realized through this whole process was, first I thought that money was the reason we were the lack of money was the reason we were discontented. And no, the reason we were discontented was because of repeated poor decisions. And when I started to get money throughout my 20s, as I climbed the corporate ladder, I continued to make poor decisions with that money, and it just amplified the amount of bad decisions I was able to make. And that's what led to over 6 figures worth of debt. And it led to a lot of more discontent in my life. And so I had to change the decisions I was making. And to do that, I had to start looking inward. But before I could do that, I had to get rid of the sort of external clutter in my life, because I think those material possessions, that material clutter is just a reflection of it's this physical manifestation of really what's going on inside. And by clearing that, I was able to become a bit more aware of what my internal clutter was as well.
I myself was a crazy workaholic for a long time, and to the point that I resented going on vacation. Like, I was just brooding and miserable when I was on vacation because I should be home working. And I have so changed that now not only do I thoroughly enjoy and very much look forward to my vacations, but I think the thing that I spend most of my money on is vacations. Actually, it's not on things that I can say, look, I have this, I have that, I have this, I have that. It's that I want those experiences. That's what I want to buy. I want to be able to go places. I want to make some memories with the kids. And that's what's really, so even though I wouldn't say I'm a minimalist, when I stopped to think about it before having you on, I thought, well, what kind of things do I buy? I mean, I buy food. Occasionally I buy some clothes. When there's new music that comes out that I like, I buy that. But it's not like every day I think I got to go to Macy's and get 15 things, or the new such and such phone is out, I have to have that. I guess I'm just not that way. So oddly enough, in a weird way, maybe I am at least a fellow traveler.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we share the same values. And so, yeah, I think the word minimalism is exactly the right word to use and exactly the wrong word to use when we talk about this. Minimalism, when you hear it, you think radical or stark or overly simplistic, but really that word draws people in, and they want to hear more about it. And you realize that, okay, there are different flavors of minimalism. If you want to own 15 items and not have any possessions in the world, that's okay. Minimalism will allow you to do that, but it'll also allow you to question what is important in your life and begin to focus on that, as opposed to focusing on well, I mean, really the stuff becomes a veneer or some sort of facade, because we buy these things to try to cover up the discontent or the anxiety that we experience, especially for someone like me and you who are both recovering workaholics. I was literally working 70 to 80 hours a week, managing a bunch of those retail stores. And in fact, I worked 362 days a year. And where I work, the culture, they actually frowned on you if you took vacation time. You were considered a slacker or lazy if you did that. And so I didn't have the experiences I want to experience. And now I am much more focused on giving to others, but also growing. And I think the best way to grow is through these various experiences that sometimes are even uncomfortable. You put yourself in a new situation that's slightly uncomfortable, but that place of discomfort is the place from which we grow the most.
You took this message on the road, and part of the Minimalists shows you and Ryan taking this on the road. That really interests me, because you both felt like you had discovered an insight, a truth that needed to be shared with other people. But you had no way of knowing if anybody wanted to hear it, or even if they did, if they could find out about what you were doing and come out to hear you. So you were really taking a step into the dark when you did that. Talk about that.
It was a lot of fun. We basically hit the road without many expectations. And we went to just different bookstores. Ryan and I wrote a book called Everything That Remains. It's a memoir about the 5 years of our life, from the suit and tie corporate guys to becoming minimalists and eventually the minimalists. And we just took that on the road. And as you said, often we'd show up at an event and 2 people would be there. But then the crowd, as the message spread and it got picked up by media, and we had a TEDx talk that went viral, and we had a lot of stuff that got picked up online. All of a sudden, 2 people turned into 20, and 20 turned into 200. We had one event where 1,400 people showed up toward the end of that tour. And what I realized is that adding value is a basic human instinct, and that's why the message really spread. Someone was finding value in it. And Tom, I know you'll do this as well. If you find a book or article or a podcast that you really find value in, your first inclination is to share that with people you care about, whether that's on social media or emailing it to a friend or family member saying, I found value in this. I think you'll find value in it too. And that's what we learned, is that we have this basic human need to want to add value to other people's lives. And so you talk about your daughter wanting to contribute for the holidays as opposed to receiving another trinket. I think that's because we want to add value beyond ourselves. And that's what this message was how do we get out here and add value to other people's lives, not in a way that is preaching, not in a way trying to tell people that you have to get rid of your stuff, but hey, maybe this might work for you too.
All right. People should want to watch this. Now, you've also written books, and you've got a website, joshuafieldsmilburn.com, and Milburn is with 2 L's. I'm going to link to that at tomwoods.com/775. Also, theminimalists.com. Is that the name of the website, theminimalists.com?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best place to go. Just go to theminimalists.com. You can find, if you want any of our books there, you can find the documentary, which is called Minimalism, a documentary about the important things. You can find that there as well. We also have over 500 essays there. It's all free. You can find our TEDx talks, some interviews we've done, our podcast as well, all over there at theminimalists.com.
How often do you release a podcast episode?
Well, we just took a break recently. We're coming back in November, but we tend to do one a week. And we do it on a different topic. So it might be on gift giving one week. And what we do is we take calls from our audience, and then we answer their questions. So it's more of a traditional call-in kind of show, but for the podcast world.
Wow. Okay, that's great. And I bet you could come up with a lot of interesting topics related to minimalism. That's nice. And especially, yeah, right, you can get input from people who listen. Well, this is tremendous. Did you think that you'd have this kind of success? I mean, at the beginning, it was not so auspicious.
No, Tom, my initial plan when all of this started was I eventually left the corporate world once I paid off all my debt, because not that there's anything wrong with working a 9 to 5. I think we all have to pay the bills. But for me, what I was doing no longer aligned with the person I wanted to become. And so I walked away from that six-figure world. And my initial plan was to work at a coffee shop 2 blocks from my house and write fiction full time. I always wanted to write fiction. And this whole nonfiction route has been a really beautiful accident, but I feel really fortunate and grateful that I'm able to contribute in this way, which was totally unintentional.
Well, it's tremendous. So theminimalists.com is where I'm going to urge people to go. When you approached me with this, my response was, well, I can't say I'm too sympathetic to what you're doing, but, I'll take a look at it. It was a real jerk kind of response, and then I watched it and I thought, oh, no, I feel bad. He's a great guy. Like, why did I give him that grouchy answer? So anyway, I hope people will have the same experience I did. Thanks a lot, Joshua. Best of luck.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Appreciate you.
Okay, I strongly urge you to check out tomwoods.com/775 to get details about what Joshua Fields Milburn is up to. Couple things, bonus episode coming this weekend, talking to the author of a wildly successful book, Unleash Your Inner Company, subtitle, Use Passion and Perseverance to Build Your Ideal Business. That's going to be a lot of fun and very interesting. And he's somebody, by the way, who is not apologetic. This is John Chisholm, the author of this book. He's somebody who's not apologetic about being an entrepreneur, but he actually understands the way entrepreneurship brings goodness into the world, actually achieves things, accomplishes things, makes people's lives better. So he's not somebody who goes around apologizing for what he does. To the contrary, he celebrates it. So we're going to have a lot of fun talking about that, and also specific questions about how do you identify what you should do in business and what niche you should get into and these sorts of things that are not easy, frankly. These are not easy questions to answer, and I'm going to pelt him with fun questions in episode 776 coming over the weekend. Also, I've got another website created by a Tom Woods Show listener. This one is libertysociety.net. And I'm just going to note to you exactly what it's all about here right from the About page. Liberty Society is a social network for libertarians, voluntarians. I've never heard that term before. I've heard voluntarists. I think I like voluntarians. Anarcho-capitalists, classical conservatives, and classical liberals who truly wish to see the realization of a free society as soon as possible. At Liberty Society, members can communicate with one another, create and contribute to projects, and create events to network with one another in the physical world. You'll find a discussion forum with a wide variety of different topic sections, customizable profile promoting your own interests, and many wonderful people with which to share your thoughts, ideas, research, and opinions. Our mission is to bring about the voluntary society where human relationships bloom and evolve on an entirely voluntary basis. So if this goal is attractive to you, sign up today and get yourself a free account over at libertysociety.net. I'm going to link to that at tomwoods.com/775 as the listener website mentioned. Remember, as I'm always telling you, I give you lots of goodies if you start your site through my link, tomwoods.com/publicity. All kinds of goodies, tutorials, mention on the show, backlink on my site, plus membership, optional membership, in my private bloggers group where we help each other. All right, that's it for today, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.